I hope you all had a great lunch break and are well fed now back in the audience. I welcome you at home and also our keynote speaker, Zack Wolfitt in the Netherlands. But I also welcome the audience in the room. As you all know, we're doing a hybrid session today. So it will be important that you actively participate in the session, because that was one of the wishes of Zack Wolfitt, our keynote speaker, who really wants to make it as interactive as possible. That was also the reason why we sent you a link to a Padlet beforehand. So you find some interesting resources, some ideas, and also some questions in there. So please open up your Padlet link if you have it. And I guess it will also be in the chat for the ones that want to do it right now. And I also want to mention that you are going to use Mentimeter later on in the session. So also have your mobile ready in case you want to vote. But before we start, I would love to introduce our keynote speaker. Zack Wolfitt was born in London. He worked for 10 years in North America in the travel industry before he moved to the Netherlands, where he now has been living for the last 20 years. He now teaches tourism management and creative business at Inholland University of Applied Science, as I said, in the Netherlands. Since 2010, he has been recording and writing about different types of educational video. He examines how the relationship between teacher and students changes once communication is mediated by the screen. In 2015, he joined the Inholland research group, Teaching, Learning and Technology, as a research fellow. He's currently researching teaching in the hybrid virtual classroom, so what we're doing right now. And he sits on the advisory committee of Media and Learning and is a core team member of the Media and Education group. He presents at international education technology conferences, such as the Online Educime Berlin. Some of you might know this huge conference. He also writes a blog. You will find it easily, Zack Wolfitt Blogspot NL for Netherlands. And I would really highlight it one more time. Zack is such an expert and he knows so much about video in teaching and learning that you should really take up the opportunity and ask him some questions. So he will start with his presentations and will serve at least 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So with no further ado, I present Zack Wolfitt.
Thank you very much indeed, Jacqueline. I really appreciate that. I just want to check, can you hear my audio okay?
Yes.
Fantastic, great. And that's a wonderful introduction. So I hope I can live up to the high billing. I'd like to thank Jacqueline for inviting me today. And also I'd like to thank the technical guys in Switzerland, Fabienne, and Guido, and also my colleagues here in the Netherlands, Guido and Tom. So thank you very much. And thank you to you as well for being here today, for being, coming to the session today. Some of you will be watching at the University of St.Gallen, some of you are watching online, and others will be watching it at a later stage when we play this back. So thank you very much for that. I'm interested though to know how you're doing. Jacqueline mentioned there will be some moments of interaction. So before we get into my story, I just want to check in with you. I know you've had lunch, probably at the end of the semester, you're getting, what's going on with you guys at the moment? So the first question I have for you is on Menti. How are you feeling right now? There's no correct answer, obviously. And you can go to the menti.com and you can see the number there is 41230223. So please you can put in one word in English. I said you can put in multiple options. Just where are you right now at the moment? That's important to check in with you guys. But take a moment. Let's have a look if we've got anything coming in so far. How are you? Food coma. Okay, interested, intrigued. Keep going, guys. Relaxed, fantastic. Tired, yes. Overwhelmed, keen, fantastic. Optimistic, content, curious. Keep coming, guys. I'd like to have as much input as possible. Happy, thank you for being happy, whoever that was. That makes me happy. Curious, relaxed, and happy seems to be coming through at the moment. Keep adding your comments, please, guys. That would be great to see that. And we'll come back to this. I see 15 people have, we've got 15 votes so far. If anyone wants to add a few more, we'll see where we are. What I really like to see here is that you have indicated that you're curious. That's really important. I'm glad about that. And what I'm doing here now is also showing that even though I can't see you guys, I'm in another country, in another space, you're dispersed in different places, I can still sort of touch base with you a little bit and just connect with you so we can see where we're at there. And that's very important when we're communicating through the screen. Is this the most important moment in the history of education ever? Well, that sounds quite dramatic. You might think, what on earth, why could it be so dramatic? Well, in the course of the session today, we'll take about 35, 40 minutes with about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. We're going to look at what is currently happening right now today and why it could be one of the most important moments ever in the history of education. Let's see if we can live up to those claims. What we'll look at basically is why now is such an important moment. We'll look at some frameworks for learning. Your experiences with video, maybe your first ever video. What's the first ever recording that you have of yourself on film or on video? Start thinking about that. We'll talk about what happens when you teach in a physical classroom, what happens when you teach online through video. Some of the affordances of video, what does that mean? We'll talk about that. How have faculty and students managed in the last year? Where are we going to next? We'll look at the synchronous and asynchronous elements. And finally, we're going to envision education X.0. We've had 2.0, 3.0. We're about to create the next iteration. And I saw a very interesting presentation earlier, which had some design thinking and AI in the session. Maybe we can use some design thinking. How are we going to create the next version of education? So that's what we have for today. At a conference a while back, I met somebody and their job title was video evangelist. Now, I am not a video evangelist. However, I'm somebody who's very interested in video. And as Jacqueline said, for the last 10 years, I've been exploring and experimenting with different types of educational video. So we're going to look back a little bit at what's happened. I like to experience, practice, and reflect on what I call video teaching. And what I'm sharing with you today is my own personal experience based on that reflecting for 10 years and also looking now and looking forward. So I'm not presenting research findings. It's my own perspective. So please feel free to challenge me, ask me questions, disagree. Let's have a lively discussion. When we look at the best learning, comes from Sherry Turkle from MIT. And she talks about understanding specific events through competing theoretical prisms. What does that mean? Different perspectives. If we can look at the moment now, we can look at it from different perspectives. It will help us to understand it and we can learn even better. So today I'm going to present the theoretical prism of video. What can we learn if we look at the current situation from video? Of course, there are many other perspectives and I encourage you to go out and find those to develop your overall perspective. I was thinking last week, suddenly I thought, just make a podcast. Wouldn't that be much better? Send a podcast and everyone could listen to it when they want. So this is an essential question when we talk about video. What is the added value of this synchronous live moment now? Wouldn't it just be better if this was recorded? Couldn't it just be an audio? So whenever we make a video, we have to think about why we are making a video. When we're engaging with a live audience synchronously, we have to think, what is the added value? Hopefully you'll find added value. Last year in January, I had the honor to present at the EdHub Days at the University of Bern. And I saw how far ahead Switzerland was from the point of view of technology and from the point of view of new ways of teaching and learning. So I was very inspired there. What I discussed there was continuing the transition into the age of video. Well, we were definitely continuing the transition. And this is the sort of environment that I was teaching in at a lecture hall. This isn't me, but it gives you an idea of the sort of environment, an audience of people, and we were talking face to face. And that was in January last year. But then something happened, and I keep coming back to the most important moment in the history of education. Something happened, and we all know what that was. That was not today, COVID-19. Education just stopped. We slammed on the brakes, absolutely stopped. It was a worldwide pandemic, and we had to just stop what we were doing. And what did we do? We locked the classroom doors. We physically locked the classroom doors. We left the physical spaces, and we moved to our homes, to other places in order to continue the education. So we had to manage the crisis. We responded. We responded as best we could with emergency remote teaching. That is a temporary shift to an alternative form of education. Hopefully, we're now entering the recovery stage. And that's why I think it's so important. What are we going to do next? This is our chance. And the mitigation is trying to reduce another emergency happening. And preparedness, how prepared were we? Well, from what I saw last year, I could see a lot of Swiss universities were in a good position with their online teaching. We've learned a lot since then. So we were in this environment. Here we were lecturing face-to-face with our audience right in front of us. And then something happened. You probably can't see what's happening here. There's another image on top. What is that image? You can see there's an image of me teaching from my home in the Netherlands. Improvised some tables, some sort of stools on a desk, looking into the camera, and there I am. I'm trying to create that feel, but from my home. That's quite an ask, and I know that a lot of you have been doing the same, trying to engage and find a way to do that. That is the challenge. And what happened? Well, we were suddenly turned into media producers. We had a lot of support from our universities. We took the technical skills from colleagues, but we had to suddenly produce content. We had to communicate through the screen. Through this flat screen, we no longer had a stage to present to a public audience in front of us. We just had a little camera and this screen. And that is what I've been looking at for the last 10 years. What happens to us as teachers? What changes in the relationship with us? The first thing we did was we tried to mirror and recreate the sort of familiar surroundings. So this is from Microsoft on Teams, sort of idealized picture of what a lecture hall might look like. Everybody's brightly lit, engaged there. When I shared this with my students, the first thing they did was to check if they could stick their finger up the nose of the person behind them. Or was it my colleagues who were doing that? I can't remember. Anyway, we can still have fun in this environment. What you see is we were mirroring, trying to recreate what we were familiar with, rather than creating something new. So that's why today matters. May the 27th, 2021. Right now, today, at this moment, think about this moment. Why is it so important? Because we've only got a few moments left before we're going back. What are we going to go back to? And education does not change very quickly. Education changes slowly, if it changes at all. But now, for the first time ever, everything is loose. Everything's broken into pieces. It's melting, it's fluid. Everything is possible. Now is our chance to change. Before we know it, it will refreeze and we'll be back stuck, trapped. It's not so easy to develop and innovate. Take this opportunity. So that's why I talk about Education X.0, the following iteration. In September, we're going to be back in the classroom. And what are we going to go back to? What's it going to look like? How is it going to be structured? Now, this is a picture of an old-fashioned lecture hall. I know very well that your lecture halls in St.Gallen do not look like this. You have a lot of very high-tech equipment. But this image is more of a metaphor for how we perhaps think about old education. And I challenge you to try to recreate, bring in new images, new mental models for the next stage. So that's why I talk about this moment. And I'll come back to this several times. No, never before in the history of the world has everything stopped, all education stopped at the same moment, and we've completely shifted our form of education overnight. That's never happened before. It may never happen again. We've had a year and a half of learning, experiencing, experimenting. We're going to now go back. What are we going back to? I know some of you have already turned in St.Gallen. I hear there are some lessons taking place also here in the Netherlands. So we're starting to see people again. How are we going to manage that? Before we get to different types of video, I'd like to just mention two models that I'm particularly think are particularly important when we're teaching in general, but also when we're teaching online. We're teaching through video. The first one is the cognitive load theory from John Sweller. And that basically says we have an extremely limited amount of working memory to process what's going on. So right now, you're trying to get my message, but there might be an email coming in, there might be somebody sending you a message on your phone, there might be children crying in the background, all those things are coming in, multiple things open on your screen right now. I'm trying to get through to your working memory so I can give you one piece of information that you can process and connect to your long-term memory. So write down now in your diary or set an appointment, 27th of June, 1 month from today, ask yourself how much of this information, these ideas today, have you picked up? How much of it got through? If I've done a good job, maybe a couple of pieces of information will have made it into your long-term memory. Let's hope so. The second theory, which I refer to, is the multimedia theory of Richard Mayer. If you don't know about this theory, please have a look at the article from 2018, where he summarizes 30 years of his empirical research into the data. If you do know this theory, please take a look at the article as well, because I think we can learn an enormous amount from seeing what works when we present multimedia. The theory is very simple. It says spoken words are picked up in our ears, so you can hear me right now. Written words, if there's any text here, you can see it there. That written word you go through your eyes, you process it with your eyes. Images you process with your eyes. The balance of those three elements, the spoken word, the written word, and the images, that's the mix of multimedia. We know what works. Richard Mayer knows how to combine that perfectly. The way I'm presenting today draws on some of that, and you can decide whether or not it works. But please have a look at that. So please, whenever we get to video, whenever you get to teaching in general, bear these in mind. What about you and video? I'd like you to think about the first video of you that exists. What is that video? Maybe it's a film. Maybe it's on a sort of an old, actual film reel that was shot. What's the very first moving image you have of yourself? Is it from a holiday or a birthday somewhere or something that happened? So there's going to be an image somewhere. And maybe it was shot on something like this. Who knows, depending on when you were born, where you grew up. So there's going to be a record, the first image of you growing up somewhere, depending on those aspects. What about in your professional life? What's the first recorded moving image you have of yourself in a professional context? Maybe it was presenting a class, maybe it was at a training, maybe you're filmed with colleagues, who knows? See if you can find it. The first one that I could find was back in 2010, when I made my first video recording of a lecture. And what I found very interesting was suddenly I presented my slides, I shared my information. I thought, great, I've said my message once. Don't need to say it again, it's clear. And I talked to my colleagues, I said, did you make your video yet? And they're like, ooh, no, not yet, I don't feel so good about that. And I felt as though I crossed the road, and there was a whole bunch of people waiting around behind me, waiting to cross the road. And I thought, guys, come on, over you come. It's good, it's interesting. People were hesitant. I'm interested to know why they were hesitant. So before we get to how we view video, I'd like to go back to the Menti. We're going to go to the second question, and it's going to be, I'll come to that in a moment, sorry. So I interviewed my colleagues, and I asked them what they saw, the difference between the physical classroom and the online classroom or teaching through video. And I call that catching the wave. How could I help my colleagues sort of get moving with this subject? So if we go now back to the Menti, I've got this one here. I'm going to close this one, and we'll go to the next question, which is, teaching via video is different because. So hopefully you can now, I'm going to open the voting, and you can just type in, what your thoughts are about why is teaching via video different than being in person in the classroom. And maybe you've got some ideas about that. No physical presence, absolutely great, thank you for that. There is no response from the students. I've got some response from you, but I know what you mean. No immediate feedback. That's it. We're trying to pick up. Students, viewers are likely distracted by many other things. We're competing with a lot of different people. High expectations on video quality. It's got to be perfect. No energy from the audience, sort of no informal interaction. Response, empathy. This is great, guys. No eye contact. You know, if I want to look at you, I have to do this, but I still can't see you. Lack of atmospheric feedback. Looking in the camera instead of the eye. So you've got some great ideas. I'll leave this open and we'll continue to put your ideas in. Thank you for that. The first thing you mentioned was the physical classroom, and you picked out a couple of really important things. The physical classroom is transient, happens, and when it happens, it's done. Happens synchronously. So you're in the same moment. You can see into the eyes of students, you can see their body language, you maybe have a laugh, you can interact, you can pause dramatically, you can look in their eyes, you can ask a question, see whether they get what you're saying, check the knowledge. And it's also, at the end of the lesson, there's not much record of it. As in the physical classroom, we also don't see ourselves. I can now see myself on video screen, but when you're teaching, you don't see yourself. You're just sort of teaching to people. You're not aware of really what you look like or how it is. You just see the audience. So there's no sort of reflection. So I would say there's not as much opportunity for reflection. Maybe you record one of your lessons and have a look at it. But in general, we don't really know how we're doing. We ask evaluations, but we don't see ourselves very often. We just get on with our job. Now we're going to go through the looking glass. And I use the metaphor of going through the looking glass. Here we've got Alice in Wonderland, who goes up to the mirror, and you can see it's 3:30 in the afternoon. You can see there's a little plant. And as she goes up, she wants to know what's on the other side. She sort of goes all the way up here, sort of touches, and what happens? She sort of goes through to the other side, and there she is, and things are different. The clock's got a smiley face, and we're in another world. And in a way, I use that image to describe that things change when we teach via video. It also gives us a lot of opportunities. You know, our stage becomes this flat screen. We're digitalized, we're two-dimensional. We have to go into sort of media production. Think about how does our hair look, what's behind me, the lighting, the audio. All those things come on top of just normally just teaching. You show up in the classroom, you speak to people. You don't know who's watching your video. Maybe my colleagues went, oh, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I'll lose my job because I made a mistake in one of my lectures. Worried about this private interaction suddenly becoming public, being exposed. It can be viewed multiple times. It can be distributed. So it's a wonderful opportunity. But when we're doing that for the first time, it can be a little bit intimidating. And of course, we're confronted with our own beauty. Does the person we think we are, does that match the person that we see on video? And there's often a sort of, you know, when people first see themselves in video, it can be confronting. Oh my God, is that really me? But if we're going to, somebody mentioned empathy, if we're going to talk with empathy and engage with our students, it's very important that we have a positive sort of sense of who we are and our self-worth if we're going to connect with our students. So those are maybe some of the reasons why we hesitated. But of course, last year, we didn't have any choice. We were all pushed across the road in one go, right, get online, start teaching online. So in one moment in time, everybody was online teaching. That was quite dramatic. Let's have a look at some of the video affordances, and I'll explain what that word means. Imagine you see a chair, you sort of know, I could sit on that, sort of invites you to sit on it. When you look at a door, you can sort of see there's a handle you can pull. It affords a certain interaction. When we're talking about the video affordances, there are qualities or properties that give you possible uses, things of how you could or should use it. So let's look at what some of those are. Here's a video, you know, you can press the button. You can see it's linear, it's going in one direction. You can see how much time has been played. You can see where you are in the story. You can see maybe change the settings, change the speed. So there are certain elements there. Once we made a recording of our teaching, there are other things. We become supercharged. And maybe you've made web lectures or pre-recorded lectures using PowerPoint slides. Suddenly, students can fast forward. You can't fast forward me right now. When you watch the video back, you can skip ahead to the good bits. And if this isn't a good bit, or you can watch this bit again and again and again, or you can go back. You can share it. So as teachers, once we're on video, we become distributable. And that really enables us to sort of supercharge our teaching and reach a bigger audience. We can add layers, we can add quizzes and polls and so on. So video, once we're on video, we have opportunities. You can collect data from it. This is a heat map of one of the videos I made, 2 minutes long. You can see it's red, people are still watching at the end, it cools down a bit. This isn't bad for video retention. Normally on an educational video, people watch for around 5 minutes and they're done. So don't make long videos, make the videos 5 minutes. There's a lot of data on that from Guo and Kim. The link is in the sources there. Video is synchronous, happening right now if you're watching the session live, or asynchronous. And that's a very strong quality. Right now, we're in the same time zone. There's an opportunity perhaps for interaction or questions. At a later stage, everybody can pick at what moment, when and where they watch it. So that extends our teaching time. Students might be watching our videos 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, and we're sleeping nice and quiet. So it extends the teaching time. There are many different types of video, and I know from talking to Jacqueline also that you've been experimenting quite a lot. You've got a great studio. Maybe you've been making web lectures, maybe the students have been making videos, live lecture capture where you have a recording of the interaction with the students, that's recorded. Maybe you make a screencast or a PowerPoint with audio. Maybe you use that for assessment for the students. Maybe you use it to proctor them online so that they can sit an exam. So there's many different options. And then we go into the next dimension. And the next dimension is VR, augmented reality, maybe 360 video. And I also heard that some of you have been working or experimenting with that. So we have lots of options, many different types of video. I'd like to share with you an experience I had last year in London, and I was turned into a humogram. What is a humogram? I was turned into a human hologram, and I had the experience to communicate with somebody who was in Toronto and I was in London. And I'll show you what that looks like. Before we get to that, I would like to mention another type of creative video use. This is my colleague Marlies, who set up a company. She noticed a lot of us we've got technology, we've got Wi-Fi, we've got time, students have time, but we don't have each other. We've got open spaces. So Marlies organizes a walking alone together Zoom session, great use of it. You go out into the countryside, you walk, you meditate for 7 minutes on your own, then you join a breakout room, you discuss the subject. So in an hour, you have a great sort of interaction with people. So that's one creative use, and I'm sure you've got other examples. Now we're getting to the next, how are we setting up the classroom? This is a synchronous online class. This is from the University of Utrecht, and I think you might be experimenting with something similar. You've got life-size faces, and you can stand here. I could see all of you here in front of me, and I can interact, and I know who's talking. Then you can add a physical audience there as well. And that's what I understand you have today. You've got some people in the university at St.Gallen, and you've also got people watching online. And that looks a bit like this. This was a session that I attended in KU Leuven in Belgium. And you've got, you can talk to people in the audience, you can talk to the screen people, and you can, of course, have a moderator to keep track of things. So these are different developments. Okay, now back to that hologram, that humogram. This is what it looks like. You get beamed in, life size, to another location. It seems quite incredible. I'm going to play you the video. There's no audio on the video, but I'll commentate on what you see. So in this context, I am standing in a studio in London, but I'm being projected synchronously live to a studio in Toronto. That could be a stage, that could be somewhere else. So let's have a look if I can get this one play. So as I said, there's no audio. So here you can see me. This is Brandon in the studio, and I'm there as a hologram being projected into Toronto. It's real time, and I'm interacting. I'm talking to him. I can hear him. He can hear me, and he sees me as a hologram. Then we come over. This is a real person that you see. And I was asking him about the future of education and how we could use holograms. What's the value of a three-dimensional image, a life-size three-dimensional image? And he talked about the interaction that you can have with people, the sense of realness and being there. So this may seem like science fiction. Let me stop that one there. So that may seem like science fiction, but the technology is there. It's coming before we know it. It's really cool. When you come back to the real world, you realize how real people are, but also holograms are quite real. So these are some of the ideas that we have. What about faculty online? How did you experience it online? Well, we had that remote emergency teaching. Our private and our personal worlds merged. It was quite a challenge. We had multitasking. We had to share our private world, and we had to manage how we were going to do that. You are on mute. How often do we hear that? The key phrase from last year. But that says something about the technical challenge of communicating and teaching via the video screen. Here's the working from home conference call bingo. What's that in the room behind you? Is that your dog? Oh, I'd never seen you in casual clothes before. So that personal, private, overlapping with the public world, that's quite an ask. You've got the crazy situation of the guy, senator in Ohio. You can see him, here he is, in a Zoom meeting with his room background, but he's got his seatbelt on, he's driving. And of course, poor old Judge Ponton in Texas, who was turned into a cat, the filter somebody left on his Zoom. If you haven't seen the video, watch it. It's really very amusing. But this says something about the complexity of teaching online. We also had to do a whole bunch of things. We had to get things in like lighting, green screens to our home. We bought proper microphones. We brought headphones. We started to sort of set up our desks differently. This is how I set up my desk. I bought a new screen at a slightly higher level. What's this got to do with teaching, you might think? Well, that's the thing. We were so occupied with all of this. It was a challenge to stay focused on the teaching. We started to worry about our background. Oh my goodness, my books are all messy. You can even go online and people can rate your Zoom background. This is really messy, so I tidied it up straight away. Little trick, take a picture of your tidy room and put it in as your Zoom background. Then you'll never have any mess stress. What about Zoom? Saying Zoom to represent all types of video communication. People say, I'm going to have a Zoom meeting, even though it could be Teams or something else. Zoom is a great platform, but we get tired through Zoom. So have a look at the research from Geraldine Fauville of the University of Gothenburg, which she did with Stanford, about why we get tired. You can do the Zoom exhaustion and fatigue score and see what can you do to become less tired when you are following a Zoom meeting. You know, we're using our eyes to look at faces. This is what we see, perhaps we see on our screen. That is very confronting. It's a lot of faces staring at you. Normally, we only have that in an elevator. Get in a crowded elevator, everyone's staring. What do? We look down, we look away, it's awkward. Well, this is quite sort of emotionally and visually tiring to see. Very interesting piece of research. We exaggerate our gestures. Hello, can you see me? Thumbs up, sort of stuff. So we're sort of communicating differently. We spend a lot of time looking at ourselves when we're teaching or when we're in a Zoom meeting, checking that we look okay, worrying about our position in reference to everybody else. And it's very interesting that women experience more Zoom fatigue than men. I won't go into why that is, but you can see it in the research. What about our students? How did our students manage? Well, I think it was incredible to see how students managed across the world when they went online. If we look at the timeline here, I know you can't see it, but over there is 2003, over here is 2021. A student attending St.Gallen in September of this year was born in 2003, right the way over there. What has happened since they were born? Well, here you can see it. Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram, they were born into all this video, and we are competing in this territory here. This is what we're competing with, and it's really quite a crowded field. So to get their attention is a challenge. But our students, I think in general across the world, did fantastically well. Intrinsic motivation, self-regulated learning, it's much harder to stay in your own room and to study online. That requires a whole lot of extra work and effort, but they did what they could. We're in the middle of a pandemic. That's quite challenging, health-wise, extra pressure on us. Where are your students studying? Are they maybe in public transport? Maybe they're following everything on a mobile screen, on a small phone. Maybe they don't have a private space in which to be. So all these things have challenged us when we're trying to communicate clearly through our video teaching. Some of my students are even in bed when I start the session. And I say, guys, who's in bed in the chat? And some people are still asleep, or they're still sort of, yeah, I'm not feeling well today, I couldn't get out of bed. So these are things that we've experienced, and I'm sure you've got your own situations. But to understand for our students, it has been at times lonely. So we've had to reach out with them and try to be positive and support them in that context. This is apparently what we see when we communicate via our Teams session. I'm just checking, I've got about 5 minutes to go. So hopefully I can wrap up in that time frame. This is an idealized version, but I've written an article called Camera On, Camera Off. When you go into a session, this might be what you see. Maybe you identify with this. Just a whole bunch of logos and no faces. And I can understand why students may not want to share their image online. For us as teachers, video highlights us and shines a bright light on us. It can be quite awkward at times. For the students, online, they could be multiple personas, they can have avatars, they can live in different worlds. But suddenly, here in this little box, they have to share who they really are. And that can be quite confrontational. So I do understand that, but an interesting debate. We're going to talk about synchronous, and then we're going synchronous, asynchronous, and then we're going to come to the final part, which is education, X point home. We've got the moment now to think about how we plan and organize our education. This is a model of blended flipped learning from TU Delft. You've got face-to-face down the bottom, and you've got online at the top. I would challenge that and say, actually, we could look at it as synchronous activities and asynchronous activities. What can we do synchronously to get together in the same time? And what are we doing asynchronously? I would argue that video can be used to move a whole lot of stuff from here up into the asynchronous. And in fact, that's what I did with my own teaching. I put all my content online, it was all recorded. And then I went to school and I thought, what am I going to do today in my synchronous time? How am I going to use that? I had nothing to teach anymore. It was all online. Moment of panic, and then a moment of how fantastic. I've got carte blanche. I can create a whole bunch of new alternative ways of learning and exercise and make it really, really interactive. So how we arrange and choose those activities, this is a model from Inholland. It's a PDF file. It gives you a choice diagram, what you do synchronously, what you do asynchronously, where is it in the learning process, and where, and how can we make those choices to arrange our education. So we've had a look at a couple of models, John Sweller and Richard Mayer. We've had a look at the different types of video, the affordances, the role of teachers that you've experienced, the role of students, how they've managed it, the support from faculty, from the technical guys. We've also looked at how we organize and plan the synchronous, the asynchronous. So we're back to that moment. Let's think about envisioning education X.0, and I'd definitely like to hear your thoughts on this in the discussion. How do you view it? Right now, I've said it's the most dramatic moment or important moment ever in the history of education. It may sound, dramatic, but think about it. No one else in the history of education has ever had this same moment. We spent a year out, hard reset, back to basics, different format. How do you view it? What's your role in creating the new education? What's your role in building something new? Remember, classroom doors are going to be opened up. Are we going back to that old way of thinking? There's a lot of positives about that, of course. Are we going to bring in some new elements of what we've learned? So I'd really like you to think and reflect on this. 27th of June, remember, you're going to remember this. What education are you going back to? What type of education is it going to be? How can you use video, the affordances of video, of educational video? How can you use that in a creative way to sort of enrich and enhance the new education that you're going back to? How will you be teaching once you go back to see your students face to face? Will anything have changed? What will have changed? So remember, things are still fluid. These pieces of education are floating around like bits of ice. You've still got a chance to redesign, to move, to recreate, to put new things in. But very soon, before we know it, it's going to be solid, it's going to be frozen again, and it'll be less easy to move. So let's take that freedom while we're there. How are our students going to study in the new education? What environments are we going to expect them to be learning in? Sort of formal environments or informal environments? How are we going to build classroom settings or learning spaces that will facilitate a hybrid learning in a different context. So I'll close by saying we're back to that amazing moment. Let's discuss how you guys are going to, how you view it. Do you see it as an exciting moment, or is it just, yeah, sorry, we'll start in September, it will all be the same? What's your perspective on that? So we'll come to the discussion in a moment. I would just like to say, mastering the affordances of video. Can we really master the affordances? I think that's a bit of a tall order because I haven't mastered the affordances. There's always new types. So it's quite a challenge, but maybe we can reflect on the elements and components of video, reflect on what we've learned, and that will help us to build education and rebuild an X.0 education in the next round. Let's return to Sherry Turkle. I've provided for you a prism. We've looked at things from the point of view of video. There are many other ways we can see it. So please bring in those different contrasting theoretical prisms in order to understand this moment. And if you find anything interesting, then please let me know. I know this has already been linked, so I don't need to stick on that. And I've got 4 pages of references. Can't read that, it's on the Padlet. So to make sure we have enough time for the discussion, I would like to thank you very much for your attention and to wish you all the best in setting up new education when you go back in September. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zack. So please ask your questions. I'm curious to hear if this was a special moment for you.
Thank you. I can see some virtual hand claps. That's always very positive for me. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, and please, the ones that just write in the chat, don't hesitate to try to unmute you and just ask your questions right away. We're eager to hear someone from home.
Okay, before they get ready, maybe you mentioned we should think hard about what is worth to do synchronously. What conclusions did you draw for yourself? Can you give 2 or 3 examples?
I didn't see who was asking that question. What was your names?
That was actually here in the audience.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that question.
Here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an interesting reflection from a professor in the States, and he said, why was it so easy to move stuff online? He said it was relatively easy. We just switched online. He said a lot of the learning that was happening synchronously was perhaps knowledge transfer. So I would start by saying, take all content delivery out of the synchronous moment. Okay, today, ironically, I've been delivering content synchronously, sort of what you expect. I couldn't really ask you guys to all read the slides beforehand and then come prepared. We expect that of our students, but not of everybody. So I would say content delivery can be moved out. Learning takes place when we're moving. Learning takes place when we're discussing, when we're criticizing, when we're giving each other feedback, when we're practicing, when we're using our hands. Those are all elements that we know that's where learning takes place. But very often, that may not be taking place in the synchronous environment. So I would start by challenging you to see how much stuff you can push out of your traditional synchronous space. And video is one of the many tools you can use. Learning management systems are others. So you've got things, up there in the asynchronous space. And with that freedom, then you can do creative sessions with breakout rooms, with discussion, with peer tutoring, with mind maps, making things, presenting in different ways. Then suddenly we have room to teach. But that's a big step to take. Does that give you some answer to your question?
Oh, thank you very much. I especially like that you mentioned learning happens when we are moving. I think this is the most underexploited aspect that we could be most creative about. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. And my colleague Marlies van Haal, who she takes students out to their nature, and we move and we walk and we work on assignments together. So let's get everybody moving. It's not going to hurt the corona kilos either, let's face it. Other questions, keep them coming, or just shout out anything you'd like to, or do you agree, do you disagree?
I have also a question. Before you told us video shouldn't be longer than 5 minutes. So I have some theoretical inputs. I can't match, I can't tell them or teach them in 5 minutes. What's your recommendation to keep the attention of the students when video is getting longer?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. And the reason I mentioned the 5 to 6 minutes is from a very large scale piece of research done in 2014 by Guo and Kim, where they looked at when people stop watching videos. If it's 5 minutes, people watch 5 minutes. If it's 10 minutes, it drops off. 30 minutes, people still watch 5 minutes. So there are some things that you can do, because as you mentioned, you've got some complicated theory. One of the approaches of Richard Meyer in his multimedia is to segment. So rather than having a lecture of 30 minutes, you actually have, this is one subject, and I'm going to explain this one subject. And I'm going to explain, and that's a 5-minute overview. Or if it's really complicated, you want to expand it 10 minutes. Then the student has control to go in, to scroll through, to pause. It's more manageable, it's more navigable. If you have a long video, it's hard to find the bit that's relevant. So the first tip I would be is to look at your 30-minute, 60-minute lecture and to put it into chapters and concisely, using the principles of multimedia theory, come up with a 5-minute explanation of this part of the lesson. And then you can do the same with the other. At one point, I took a theory and I broke it down into 40 different 5-minute lectures. It's a lot of work, but the great thing is, once it's there, I never need to explain that bit of the model ever again. I can, of course, ask the students to view it, and then in the sessions, we can discuss it, we can argue it, we can contrast. So it's not to say that content should be trivialized or reduced in complexity, but we need to make it easy for the learner to pick it up. Remember that line going through the cognitive load. So segment it, short sections, make it easy to navigate, easy to find the relevant information. And that requires a rethink of how we produce, how we teach. And that's quite challenging. Did that give you something to go on?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. It's a great question.
And actually, if I can add on to this, if you're using the learning platform, this is it makes it easier for you, because then you can put your video into a context. So you can have an exercise afterwards, or a reflection exercise, or you have a forum there where students can discuss just this short segment. That works really well, but it's really worth to have the shorter videos, because just as Zack says, research shows us that this is really true, and you have to take that into account. That's also the reason why we don't recommend lecture recording and having those available on Teams, because we know that the students won't really engage with the video content. They might watch it for reference for the exams, but what actually happens is not much, unfortunately.
That's a great point, Jacqueline, and it actually comes back to the difference between the physical classroom, where there's a different type of attention, where it's more of a social activity, where you also have room to be non-linear. Oh, hang on, I've got a great idea. Let me tell you about this. Somebody goes off on a tangent, inspiration. Those are the qualities of the synchronous lecturing. You see an expert thinking and developing ideas, responding. When we convert that to video, you can't be so random. You have to be very linear, very segmented, very structured, very clear where you are. So it asks quite a lot of us as lecturers to transform and convert the way we present information in different contexts.
Thank you for your great presentation, Zack. I particularly liked how you also went into the emotional aspect of having to put yourself out there on Zoom, etc. I've been thinking about that a lot, because in the classroom, the physical classroom, we have this relationship of trust, that we know what happens in the classroom stays in the classroom. We remind students that there are no stupid questions, etc. But when you are putting out videos or on Zoom, you kind of have to take the risk that you might end up on as a meme in a toxic chat room or something like that. How do you deal with that personally?
Yeah, Claudia, thank you for that question. And I noticed when you asked it to me, I sort of had a sort of a shiver of like, yeah, this is what happens. And it's this vulnerability that we as teachers for years and years have just been in that intimate personal space, transient, ephemeral, and it was gone. There was no data trail. Now, when we say something, bang, it's recorded, it's on screen. It might be there for all time. It might go viral. So I think we also have to consider, when do we record content? What are the guidelines that we have to record content? We obviously got very strict guidelines in the European Union, and I know also in Switzerland, about sharing data and when to record. We have to be incredibly sensitive about that and aware of how that makes us vulnerable. So we can't be perfect every day, and maybe one day something goes wrong. So we also need to be confident and understand that you know, the spotlight that is on us is even more so on our students, and we have to take that into consideration. Really great question. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you for answering it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Please,
just another question. Hi, Zack. My name's Eric. Thank you a lot for your presentation. It was very interesting to follow. And I'm personally working on the topic of 360-degree videos in teacher education for reflection processes. And there was a very interesting point you made, that also like these technologies are coming up even more. Also with VR, you showed the hologram. So as we're talking of more immersive technologies here, which also offer a more emotional involvement and multiple perspectives, it would be very interesting to know if you have any experience with that, with a maybe also didactically valuable use of those videos in education from your experience, or also from experiences or use cases at your university.
Yeah, Eric, thank you very much for the question. And great, you're working with 360. It's complicated, it's exciting, but it has a lot of potential. And I was just watching Ready Player One yesterday evening for some inspiration, which is a sort of virtual reality film. And then you see maybe where we're going to go in the future. So your question, Eric, is about how we implement didactically 360 teaching into the classroom. You know, how many headsets do we have? Maybe also, what is the role of the teacher when I've got 15 people in VR headsets? You know, what are the didactics? I can't perhaps give you any direct answers on that. All I could say is that there are certainly people working on that. And I would ask you to email me that question, and then I can send you some links on people who are looking at 360 video. And how do you teach with it? You can imagine you've got 20 students all with VR glasses on, then you lose the eye contact. What instructions do you give? What are the learning goals? So it's a really interesting dynamic. And I think we're still not there with 360, but people like yourself who are sort of innovating, pioneering, you know, in a few years' time, I think we'll have some really exciting environments. So please email me that, and I'll get back to you with some links and some connections. Thank you for that question.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. And I saw that we do have Chris there, who wants to ask a question. Please go ahead, Chris, and unmute yourself and put yourself on camera.
Thank you. I was already on camera. Thank you for a very rich presentation. That was wonderful. I want to come back on something you said earlier in the lecture, where you said, you know, there is now a time for full of possibilities for change, but we might also very quickly freeze again and fall back to our old habits. So what ideas do you have so that we can actually keep open this window of opportunity, and so that we don't go in September back to full refreeze, and use the experiences of the last year and a half also, you know, to try to keep experimenting maybe?
I mean, Chris, thank you for that question. It's a really big question, and I wish I had the answer for it. I hope that we go back to physical education as soon as possible. I don't want this sort of fluidity to continue, because we want to be back to healthy human interaction. I think it's got me thinking this question. I think the first thing is to realize how special this moment is. I've been hammering away at that point, but it's never happened before, and it's just a window. So we have to see ourselves as the curators of this moment. We have the responsibility, everyone who's listening in on this, everyone in the community has the responsibility to take that moment and to extend it, not to go back to, to discuss, to have different models, to have different approaches, to continue experimenting. And I saw a huge shift, for instance, in online exams before the pandemic. That was almost a no-no. But we were forced to do it, something that was considered totally unacceptable by many people. They got angry when I even started discussing it. We were all doing it a few months later. So we see that the rules and the sort of expectations within, exam boards, the hierarchy that gives us the structure, that has been loosened. So this is also a message to the managers of the education. Stay flexible. Every idea that comes your way, say, yes, let's give it a go, we can do that. Because we as the faculty need to have that creativity, but we need structures in organizations that remain fluid and are open and prepared to take risks.
Thank you. That's a very valuable instigation.
Thank you. Let me know how you get on, Chris. I'd be happy to hear.
Some more
I see we have just a few more minutes, Jacqueline. I know you have a tight schedule.
Yeah, I can just see that Anne-Catherine is writing a comment. Do you want to add in person, Anne-Catherine?
Yeah, I just, hello, I just wanted to ask, I really love the look of your presentation, and I would like to know which software or setup you are using.
Thank you, Anna-Catherine, for that question. First of all, you start with PowerPoint. This is just a normal PowerPoint behind me. And then you've got a Zoom connection. So I've just got one video feed going into Zoom. So this is just my video feed. But between my PowerPoint and what you're seeing is something called chroma key. And that sort of puts the two images together. So I've got a green screen here, and I've got my PowerPoints behind there. So the chroma key is the technique, and that basically combines the two images a bit like a newsreader. So I can stand in my slides and gesture and communicate, and you get sort of a slightly more than just the face. So yeah, experiment, try it out. Have you been doing something like that?
Yeah, I tried with Prezi video, which had a kind of similar look, but the presentation itself is much smaller.
Yeah.
And then I asked my students, and I really was happy with that look and that format, but then I asked my students and they didn't like it. And because they said it's too small, the presentation itself is too small. And then I asked myself, is it kind of vanitous to put my face too much into the video in comparison to the ordinary PowerPoint presentation? And we learned at another Tag der Lehre that this emotional bonding is very important in teaching. And this is what I took with me, but now this term I had the impression that the students are rather interested in just the PowerPoint presentation and not in bonding with their teacher. And so I stopped doing Prezi, but I like your format a lot.
Yeah, I mean, Anna-Catherine, it's a really important point. You put yourself on the video. Here you've got my face. We know from eye tracking, a face is going to be looked at. So whatever is up there, people just are drawn towards the face. So if you want to have the attention, then it's very simple. Take yourself out of the picture. People will look at what they're looking at, and then you can come back in and communicate. So you can do that by switching your camera off or being in or out. So you might decide at the beginning of the lecture series, you have a short intro, and then you cut to just slides with audio, and then you appear at the end. So there's lots of different ways to do with it. But I'd be happy to see if you've got an example of your teaching, I would love to see it. So please email me a link so I can see that format, so I can learn about that too.
Mm-hmm. I will.
Thank you. If you're brave enough to share that, that's the next thing.
Yeah, that was the other thing when we did when we do our normal recording of the Zoom session. We have the recording just in our classroom, the study classroom. But when I do a video with Prezi, I have to use the Microsoft Stream with the audience potentially of the whole of the university, which is also kind of a difficult to present the thing to the whole university.
It is, you have to be brave, and it also that exposure, that public exposure, which is, you know, we're not ready for that. We just want to talk to our students. I just wanted to check, I think we're almost up on time. Is that right, Jacqueline? I know we're in Switzerland here, so I don't want to go over. I know how important that is. Thank you, Anna-Catherine, for the question. And please send me an example or an explanation of that format.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zack, for this very interesting session, and also for this interesting question, and also personal questions, because what Anne-Catherine just said, it's really what we wanted to achieve with this session. Reflect on your use of video. What should I do? What should I not do? So this was extremely helpful for us to reflect on these questions in more depth afterwards. Unfortunately, we already have to move on. Of course,
that's how it is.
You will get a small present from us, from the Appenzell, which is the countryside close by. Yeah, you will get it via mail, of course. And thank you so much for taking the time and also preparing this wonderful session, because you couldn't be here due to travel restrictions. But I think you made the best possible one can achieve when he has to teach online. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good luck. And please send questions through and follow the discussion.